Today's episode of The Bluff is sponsored by SITREP. SITREP is a notorious open-source intelligent app that provides the latest updates for over 180 countries and over 500 topics, allowing you to stay ahead and informed. Now available on Apple and Google. Thank you, SITREP, for sponsoring this episode. Welcome to the Bottom Line Up Front, an Artorias podcast. I'm Stefano, Chief Intelligence Officer of Artorias.
And I'm Christian. I am the CEO of Artorias.
And I'm Michael Newman. I'm Senior Intel Analyst at Artorias.
And today we're going to discuss, obviously, the breaking news today, January 3rd, 2026, that has really spread across the world, and is the U.S. operation that led to the capture of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cecilia Flores. As of right now, as we're recording, Nicolas Maduro currently just landed in New York, where he's facing federal drug charges and narco-terrorism charges in the Southern District of New York. In a daring operation around 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, U.S. military forces conducted extensive airstrikes along large military targets in Venezuela, with the vast majority of them concentrated on Caracas, targeting command and control nodes, radar sites, air defense areas, and headquarters. Also enabled by cyber operations and even some space-based borne operations, enabling a group of 160th and Delta Force operators to go in and capture Nicolas Maduro in Caracas. During the operations, a Black Hawk did suffer damages but was flyable, and some American service members suffered non-threatening life injuries, but no Americans were killed in the operations. However, although we do not have an exact casualty figure at this moment, we are getting reports of at least a dozen Venezuelan military personnel were killed and wounded in this operation. And President Trump, during an interview with the New York Post, highlighted that, quote, many Cubans who were protecting Nicolas Maduro were killed during the operation. Again, this has been an operation that was slated to occur apparently on Christmas on December 25th, 2025. However, because of U.S. strikes in Nigeria against ISIS, that operation was delayed, also because of weather, to January 3rd, which was successfully executed. And now in this episode, we want to talk about the way this operation was conducted, the successes of it, what do we think the future of Venezuela looks like, and is this a new time of Monroe Doctrine 2.0 in the Western Hemisphere? But with that, Christian, I'll push it on to you for any of your opening statements, and then I'll go to Michael.
I think it was absolutely blissful, to be completely honest. I mean, I think a lot of us, I know some personal friends that have lost tens of thousands of dollars on Polymarket, for example, because everybody assumed that this was going to start happening when rumors started coming around August that CIA was on the ground. And then kind of that was confirmed earlier today by Trump in his speech. And everybody just assumed that this is going to be a lot faster and a lot swifter. But I also think people assumed it would be a lot more all-encompassing than it was. I mean, this was a very clinical in and out mission. And this is one of those examples in time where it can be shown that the United States just cannot be touched when it comes to, especially missions like this, kill or capture missions. Like, it's just incredible how well executed this operation was. This operation fundamentally was more successful than any operation prior to it, whether it's from the actual tactical level, the operational level, or even the rhetoric surrounding it in the press. Obviously, there was some pressure, obviously, because I think even people on Capitol Hill thought that this would be an actual like ground invasion because there were that many assets in the region. But the fact that they went in with Chinooks, they went in with Vipers, and they went in with Little Birds, like they used everything in our current arsenal as well as our previous arsenal to get this mission done. From even a like hardware casualty perspective, this is more successful than the Bin Laden raid. This was an absolutely blissful operation to everybody that was involved. It was clinical. I know you mentioned Delta was in there. Obviously, since it's the DOJ, they're not going to tell us, but there was images of DEA agents and so forth as well, that have kind of come to light, which is pretty cool. Um, this is, yeah, I mean, they could have done a handful of ways. I think the Trump administration having the pressure on them to execute in this way, um, showed us just how furious the U.S. military is. I mean, this goes to show no matter who you are in the world, you can't hide. I mean, this Venezuela is not a third world country; it's a second world country. If it was not under dictator rule, it would be a first world country. The fact that they just went in less than 4 hours and left is just absolutely incredible. My The only thing I have is kind of a sticky talking point that I would like to get to before we wrap this up quickly, in the next 20, 30 minutes, is the fact that we're not putting the actual elected leader of Venezuela in power. I think this comes into question. And I know I've been incredibly doomer in regards to the Trump admin very publicly, on X, and as well as this chat and anything else that we do. It just shows to me, I think that there was some backdoor dealings that may have occurred, in regards to some of the natural resources that Venezuela has, as well as their oil. It seems really sketchy to me that they wouldn't put in the person that the people wanted, and to claim, quote unquote, that it's for the better good of the country. I know for a fact if she was actually put into power, that she probably wouldn't be just handing out oil reserve licenses and rebuild licenses immediately. Um, so, from a military perspective, a law enforcement perspective, fucking masterclass. Literally, probably the best operation the United States has conducted, maybe ever, in regards to an assault on one other nation. Like, it was just quick, easy, done. As far as the geopolitical side of things and the optics there and how that transpires over the next 6 or 7 months, we're gonna have to see. But at least from my perspective, currently looking at it, it's very shady how this is being handled, with the reconstruction.
So, Michael, I'm going to go to you, but to piggyback on what you said from an intelligence perspective, we did get reporting that CIA managed to get an asset, a human source, that was intimately familiar with Nicolas Maduro's plans and ways of communicating and traveling, and the CIA was able to leverage that with additional ends such as Emmett and Sigin to have basically 24/7 understanding of where Nicolas Maduro was located at all times. And that's how they were very successful in conducting this operation. Obviously, CIA had authorizations to conduct operations in Venezuela around the fall of 2025. And clearly, they quickly executed that and managed to vastly expedite and get legitimate sources to support that. And it does also look like elements of the Venezuelan military also supported this operation. And again, that what highlights why Nicolas Maduro relied on Cubans for his personal detail protection, like if his Secret Service. This is something we kind of alluded to and I talked about when we had our Twitter space earlier, that when this first happened and kind of a lot of the Venezuelan observers were looking at this, one of the key aspects is Americans must have killed Cubans to get Nicolas Maduro. There's just no other way. The Cubans would never allow Maduro to leave, and Maduro relied on the Cubans because he didn't even trust his own military to protect him. And effectively, that's what happened because the Venezuelan military turned on him, and we do have Cuban intelligence and military personnel killed as a result because elements of the Venezuelan government, military, and Maduro inner circle even turned on and gave critical intelligence to the United States to execute this operation. But Michael, you were with us in the early hours when this happened. I'd love your take, your analysis, and kind of what you're thinking about from the operation, the geopolitics, or anything that's top of your mind about this.
Well, I really just gotta pretty much echo everything Christian said. Like through a logistical point on our military action, it was a masterclass. I mean, we had very little info coming in initially of what may have been like the goal of this mission. I mean, I remember when Christian and I were first seeing it, we were questioning, is this like is this the first strike? Is this similar to what we were seeing with Israel and their strikes in Qatar and Iran of taking out important infrastructure? But seeing that how quickly this is basically, in a sense, cut off the head of the Hydra, it now calls into question, like, what next? Like, what are the big, like, ramifications of, having Maduro taken out of the country and now, President Trump basically alluding that there's going to be direct control of whatever comes next in Venezuela. And I mean, we always echo what like the early 2000s with Iraq and Afghanistan, but it really feels like we're kind of just repeating history at this point because we're going into a country that has one fractured opposition. It has a very weak military, and Maduro obviously surrounded himself with not highly functional people and not like the master class of politicians in the world. And it kind of now it's this is the big question, and now the big thing hanging in the air is what next? What are we going to do, and how are we going to basically manage an entire country at this point that was basically running on the whims of one man?
So to go on that, Michael, I think for our listeners who might not be intimately familiar with the situation in Venezuela, is that if you're analyzing this from the opposition, the Marina Corina Machado, she's kind of like the figurehead, the leader of the opposition, right? Much more than the figurehead. But she was not the one who was elected president when Maduro stole the elections, right? That was to the opposition candidate named Edmundo Gonzalez. Edmundo Gonzalez was the rightful winner in the elections of 2024. He won over two-thirds of the election. Maduro just blatantly stole it. Everybody knew it. The reason why Marina Corina Machado couldn't run for president was because the Maduro government basically trumped up charges against her and denying her the ability to run. So they coalesced around Edmundo Gonzalez, who won by a landslide. And then after that election, he actually had to flee to Spain because he couldn't stay because of the pressure against him. Marina Corina Machado stayed in Venezuela in hiding. And then she went to Norway, in December 2025, received the Nobel Peace Prize because of her role in kind of the opposition to the Maduro government. And so that's kind of now what's happening. And what Marina Corina Machado has said in her statement is that the Venezuelan opposition is ready to assume power in the first 100 hours and then the first 100 days in a communique that she released under the leadership of Edmundo Gonzalez, the rightful, elected leader of Venezuela. But as you alluded to, the problem that the opposition has is they've really focused on really just the election and the construct of election, and they haven't really been able to pry away the Venezuelan institutions from the Maduro and the Socialist Party of Venezuela's political power over every organ and institution of Venezuela. Everything in Venezuela, the government, the institution, is wholeheartedly controlled before by Maduro, but now specifically, by the regime that he's created. And one of the debates that we've been having, and then I've been kind of having the space, is when we're analyzing Venezuela, the question we have is Maduro the glue that holds the regime in place, or is he just a piece of the puzzle? And what we're seeing is after his capture, it appears that he's just a piece of the puzzle. Because one of the key aspects that was trying to be analyzed is that are we going to see internal tensions within the Maduro camp? Because there's three key figures to really look at. Desde Rodriguez, she's the vice president, so she's like the heir of Maduro on paper, but in reality, she has no power. She was a figurehead. The two key players that have the most amount of power were Desde Cabello, who is the Minister of Interior, Peace, and Justice, all those three titles. And he is way more brutal than Nicolas Maduro, extremely more brutal. And then the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, right? Those two figures were not touched in the operation. The operation only targeted Nicolas Maduro and Cecilia Flores, his wife, leaving those two people. Right now, right before we started recording, in Trump's speech, a press conference, he basically said he kind of dismissed the opposition leader, Marina Corina Machado, which I know Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is probably not very happy with it, and said we're going to deal with the vice president. And if the vice president doesn't do as we say, a second wave can come. And right now, at least what we're seeing right now is the vice president of Venezuela is not doing what Trump wants. And so then I think that opens the can of worm of, are we going to see a second wave? Now, granted, the blockade that has been in place in Venezuela for weeks, if not months, is going to continue. The deployment of the significant amount of military resource in the Caribbean is not going to end. We had an episode months ago talking about the situation in Venezuela when it first happened and how it continued to escalate. Those are not ending. We even have some chatter about the oil tanker that there's been multiple oil tankers that the U.S. government has seized from Venezuela. There's one specifically called the Bella One in the Atlantic that the U.S. has been chasing that has now switched flags to Russia, trying to avoid being boarded and seized by the U.S., there's some chatters that we're hearing in the background that maybe the United States will still board it, even though it switched its flag to Venezuela. So at least in that construct, the military pressure and the blockade and the sanctions are going to remain in place. But I guess the question that we must ask ourselves, if the Venezuelan government under the Vice President, Desi Rodriguez, continues to challenge and not meet the demands of President Trump, do we now see more military operations? Are they much more broad? And maybe, as Michael, you alluded to, an Israel-Iran situation? Or do we see a Maduro 2.0 targeted raid trying to capture one of these key leaders, such as Diosdado Cabello, who really controls the organs of these Venezuelan institutions that maintain the regime? Christian, I'll go to you. I mean, what do you think? Do you think the Venezuelan government is going to cave, or are they going to be resisting the United States?
Again, I can highlight your point of, is Maduro just a small piece of this larger conspiracy, or does their country actually want change? But I think that's in the power of the people at the end of the day. I mean, if the Trump admin backs the current makeup of it, then obviously I don't see anything changing. I mean, they're just going to find someone more evil to replace, and the usual power vacuum scenario that transpires when any coup happens. But I mean, I'd like to believe that they find some common sense and they use what the people want. I mean, if I was leading this reconstruction, I mean, I would call an election. I would have every single person vote freely. If that requires the United States, with the help of the United Nations, which I don't believe the United Nations would be against in any regard, because they've condemned countless times the sham elections that occurred, and all of the roadblocks, as you mentioned previously, for people that they knew were going to win. I mean, that's what I would do. I mean, then again, I don't think Trump cares what other people think. I think he's entirely going to use whatever he can unilaterally, and that's again where my fear comes from in terms of in terms of the nation. I mean, if I was in the current shoes of whatever makeup is the Maduro admin right now, I'd be fucking shit scared, to be honest with you, knowing that my leader just got taken out in less than an hour and a half of being in country. But at the end of the day, like, is the money and greed worth that personal risk? Potentially. I mean, but again, if you're falling in the eyes of the people, it really depends on what Trump does next. That's what we should be watching. We should be watching what the United States decides to do next. Who are we backing? How do we want to do this reconstruction? Again, how I would do it is the most democratic way possible. I would go to the UN and be like, hey guys, I'm going to need your help. Please help me. Send in white helmets. We're going to keep their infrastructure going. We're going to make sure that all of their normal government duties are all taken care of. Everything done is administratively. Things are still taken care of. Taking out the bad people that run the oil or run the drugs or whatever, and making sure that the Venezuelan people then have the ability to vote on specific heads of those departments, specific heads of the infrastructure projects, specific heads of the entire government as a whole, and allowing those people to come in and then appoint who they need to appoint, just like we would to establish any government around the world. I mean, it's not a difficult path. It's going to obviously take a lot of work, but it's possible. I mean, the Trump administration last night just proved what's possible, in least terms of militarily. I think that's possible diplomatically as well. And yeah, I mean, for the likes of like China, I don't think they would be I don't think they would be against that plan either. Russia will definitely be against that plan. Iran will definitely be against that plan. But I think all the major powers of the world now would be completely down for something like that. It depends on how in bed Trump is with this idea of, holy shit, I could potentially control this country for a long time, get a ton of contracts, and basically do what the British did previously, I guess, a better term, during the 20th century there. But I don't know. You're more of the expert on this stuff, I know.
No, and I think, I mean, one of the things is, going back at it, kind of, I mean, I'm looking at it from, there's a lot from like the if we're doing like a scenario where the opposition gets in power, is this something that they do it on their own? Is it a negotiated transitional government? does everybody within the Maduro regime and the aspect of the Cartel de los Soles or the Sun cartels, which is basically the highest echelons of the Venezuelan military and blood and drug trafficking, how do they agree upon it? The problem of corruption has really permeated through the Venezuelan institutions, military, and security forces to the point where that's how it was by design. Maduro said, "This is the only way you guys can survive is through corruption, drug trafficking, illegal mining, etc. But for you to do this, I need your loyalty in return." We also have a lot of unofficial organizations that are involved there that are key for the survival of the Maduro regime that are not necessarily on paper belonging to the Venezuelan state, but are key to it. For example, terrorist organizations like the ELN or the thugs, the collectives, they're commonly known as the collectives, that are just basically thugs that support, they supported Chavez and now Maduro. And I think there's just a lot of unknowns and how that stability can kind of continue. And I think that's the problem with the opposition, that they don't have any leeway within the institutions that can stabilize the country or their own proper institutions. Right. That's the
Well, see,
fundamental problem I see.
well, that's exactly what I'm saying. You need that exterior pressure, whether it's the US, whether it's the UN, even fucking Russia. Like they need that input, which means you need to go in there and fundamentally change how the system of their government works from its entirely ground up. Um, I don't think it's that hard. You just have to get rid of those people. You have to stop them from having the power over those infrastructure or whatever trade lines or whatever accounts or whatever. I mean, all that stuff is very easily done. It just is, it's going to take effort and it's going to take a lot of manpower to do it. And maybe that's why the United States has so many assets down there. Maybe this was just the start of it. And there is actually more at play here of seeing if there's a transitional government. I mean, look at what happened in Syria. I mean, that's our greatest context on a large dictator government falling in recent history. And we all like, I was the first person to be like, I wonder how the fuck this is going to work. And I mean, Syria, by their own merit, has done very, very well for a very failed government prior and a very war torn country prior to kind of pull themselves out of the rut a little bit. Now, obviously, there's issues here and there. Um, but Syria also doesn't have like the natural resources Venezuela has, for example. Like there is more at play here for the global world and stability in the future if we can get Venezuela to be an actual democracy that actually can play ball in the global markets and start making money and everybody's prosperous. But again, I think that entirely relies on that exterior factor. Um, when I hear Trump talking about all of his plans, though, and most of it's just giving contracts to Exxon, I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad from a U.S. geopolitical perspective. Obviously, if we have a Western Hemisphere ally that has all the oil in the world, that's probably a good thing. But fundamentally, if you want to actually make that country a good country where the people are not going to be under fascist rule like they have been, then you have to allow the people to actually speak on who controls what. Which is going to require Trump to realize that maybe he does all of this and potentially the US isn't their number one trading partner. Maybe that oil is sold elsewhere. Like they just have to understand that there isn't really a quid pro quo when it comes to democracy, and it's the people's rule and right over the resources if they live there, not the decisions over at Capitol Hill or people at DC as large. Like they don't have the say over it. It's the people that are there that need to make those decisions.
Michael, let me go to you to kind of finish this conversation. I mean, what do you think is kind of the future of the Maduro regime or the remnants of the Maduro regime? And I guess my other question is, do you believe that maybe Cuba is next? We know that they're suffering an enormous economic collapse, and the basically blockade on Venezuela and the oil embargo from Venezuela is making the situation in Cuba significantly worse. So what do you think is going to happen next in Venezuela, and what do you think maybe is next for Cuba?
Well, to be honest, I take a little bit more of a pessimistic view on this. I definitely think there's the capability of worldwide of contributing to the rebuilding of Venezuela, either be through their institutions, through the opposition, or maybe a UN-backed new mandate within the country. However, I do feel like we have to look back on the US's previous attempts to do so and previous, uh, you could say coalitions of other nations and trying to rebuild nations such as Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is very different to what we've experienced within the Middle East and across Africa. However, there is a lot that goes into, the fundamental buildings of like a new administration and of a new government. And one that's going to come through like trusted institutions, such as what Christian was talking on, whether it be through democracy or say direct contributions from the people. But we also have to fret that a lot of the institutions that are currently existing have to either be completely uprooted or completely rebuilt. And whether or not the United States and its allies have, the capability of just making these institutions as they are, or making them to a point where they can properly and fundamentally control wide parts of the nation is, really anybody's question. And I can confidently say I have no idea how it would really turn out. I mean, I feel that a lot of the power that's going to come forward is going to be focused around the capital. That's going to be focused on controlling infrastructure and Venezuela's oil veins. However, what comes of the countryside, what comes of the opinions of the people, really is up to the United States at this point of how well they re-embark in the nation building process, and hopefully that they do it better than they have done before. And to speak on, Cuba and everything else, I can confidently say I'm not sure. Like it's Marco Rubio's wet dream that if we got Cuba next, as well as many others in Capitol Hill. However, it's it's anybody's question. I mean, who knows what Trump is thinking? I mean, he says something on Monday that he doesn't do on Tuesday. It's anything, and I think it's kind of I always kind of voice it as concerning that we have a man who fundamentally doesn't really, I feel, believe in anything, and fundamentally just kind of changes his opinion onto whoever's in the room, now in control of one in control of the largest and most powerful country on the planet, but also an entirely new country with some of the world's largest oil preserves.
And I guess that's the question that we're going to need the next couple of days, weeks, and months to really digest, to have a better understanding. But I do like, Michael, how you did highlight a lot of the problems and the difference between the urban centers and the rural areas. I would also, I think it's important to note, even during the Maduro regime, a lot of specifically the border regions of Venezuela, specifically with Colombia and Brazil, have been completely neglected and abandoned by the government, and they've just been completely given away to either terrorist organization, cartels, or criminal organizations, as long as they ensure that Maduro's rule is not challenged and they share part of the profits. They can run that as they see fit. Apure, a border state between Venezuela and Colombia, is for all intents and purposes ELN fiefdom, but we've seen how ELN ensures Maduro's reign is never challenged until the U.S. did a military operation there. And I think that's going to be a fundamental issue. But Mike, I'll push it back onto you.
Well, just speak on that entirely. There's a lot of concerns that comes not only to the countryside, but a lot of the de facto control that these, terrorist organizations, drug runners, and everything in between have around the country. And we saw it in Afghanistan. While a lot of the U.S. control was within the capital, Kabul, most of the country was basically the fiefdoms of whoever had the most amount of firepower at the time. And there's concern that that happens and that causes more of a rift between the population, uh, not only in how they view the United States, but also potentially any current administration that gets put in within Venezuela, whether it be, a U.S. appointed one with its allies, like we've talked about before.
We will do a longer form episode of this, and Michael will definitely be joining us sometime in the week when Matt gets back. We just want to push something out quick, and we've left a lot of questions and a lot of empty statements on the board to see what kind of happens in the coming future. Images as of right now are coming out of Maduro being walked off the plane in New York. And yeah, I mean, this is a DOJ thing at the end of the day, and I think people really need to realize that. So Obviously, there's no world where he's innocent, but there will be a trial. I'm assuming it'll be very public, and yeah, as of things that have happened in all Trump admins, first or second, this is the probably the biggest thing I've agreed with, and I think this is, as you said, Michael, the biggest wet dream for fucking Rubio. He's halfway there to his goal of federalizing Venezuela and Cuba, and I'm interested to see how this kind of transpires. More importantly, for the people of Venezuela, but also the justice that can be made, and hopefully at large larger geopolitical scare for the likes of Putin and Xi Jinping if they do decide that they want to do some dumb shit. But I
Well, I
appreciate you
do,
coming on, Michael.
of course, I do want to end with this. While the loss of Maduro is, a thorn to the side of, the axis of evil or the forces opposing U.S. hegemony, I say that this also opens the opportunity of funding counterinsurgents, funding opposition to the US's efforts in Venezuela, as we've seen before. And it's anybody's game on who's going to hold the checkbook onto funding the next kind of terrorist within North and South America.
But with that, we will. I guess we'll pick this up in the next couple days when Matt gets back and we have some time to do it.
And of course, thanks for having me, Christian.
Yeah, of course.